So what were some of the core concepts going into the rule set?
The most important core concept was that the casualties you suffer depend on your own skill level. And this actually dates back to an operations research paper. I'm an operations researcher by training that's using numbers to solve real-world problems. And back in the mid-80s, late 80s, we came across an OR paper done by the British Defence looking at how to estimate casualties taken by attackers attacking a defensive position. The conclusion they came to was that the biggest factor in terms of the number of casualties you're going to take is the number of attackers. The second biggest factor, and it's a far, far smaller factor, is the number of defenders. And then the weapons modify that and so forth. And that really sort of struck a chord with me when I read it in the mid-80s. And by nearly 15 years later, it had sort of come to the concept that it's the target that matters. And if you think about this conceptually, if you think about, say, a horde of screaming conscripts coming at you, think enemy at the gates. Yes, anybody who's Russian and so forth, I know enemy at the gates has a lot of problems, but it illustrates the issue. If you were sitting behind a machine gun right now, it wouldn't be hard to actually cause a lot of casualties. All you have to do is cock the thing and fire until it's empty belt, figure out how to load it and just keep going, and you're going to cause a lot of mayhem. On the other hand, if you've got a bunch of commandos or rangers or something coming at you, and you're going to be going, there's a target, no, and you're not going to get much done before they actually hit you. So that was a core thing in Flames of War that's completely different from anything that came before.
Sure.
The other thing that's really quite different is trying to solve the command cycle issue. One of the big focuses of Wargames rules, particularly in the 90s, was new turn mechanisms. We had PK with its card-based thing, which you drew a card to see what was going to, which unit could do what, sort of thing. And there was all sorts of things. In the 80s, it was more mechanical of trying to have multiple turns to things to happen. The problem there is that the concept of a command cycle is it's the time between me issuing an order, observing the outcome of the order, and being ready to issue another order. And that, to me, has to be a turn, because there's no possibility within that cycle of me doing anything new. So if a turn is a command cycle, then you don't need any complex command control rules and so forth. Each turn is how long it takes me to observe the outcomes of my last turn and apply them to a new turn. So that, again, is a big difference from a lot of the older style rules where, I mean, the WIG, it was 1 turn equals 30 seconds or something, then 1 turn equals 2 minutes and so forth. But I'm a company commander, and if you look at the length of battles that are fought, even a company level battle takes easily all day sort of thing. And it's the Clausewitzian friction thing, that everything is just so much harder when there's bullets flying. And even a simple thing like issuing an order, you'd think, oh yeah, all I've got to do is yell at somebody 100 meters away and bingo. Except you can't put your head up, you can't see where they are, and hopefully they're where they're supposed to be. You've got to find your runner, tell your runner to get over there, your runner's got to figure out how he's going to get over there without getting shot, get over there, give the order, come back to let you know the order's been done, and so everything takes forever. But I didn't want a fixed turn sequence either, because that doesn't work with the command cycle thing. So in an assault, for instance, my command cycle is quite small. If I'm actually involved in it, it's going to be really, really quite fast decision making and so forth about this area. But if I've ordered my engineers to clear a minefield, it's going to be 2-3 hours before anything happens. And unless something interrupts my cycle, I'm sitting there for 2 or 3 hours waiting. So having a fixed time length for a turn didn't work, but I knew turns needed to be really, really long. Anything from an absolute minimum of about 5 minutes out to several hours. And that gets rid of keeping track of time and waiting for things to happen. I tell my guys, okay, this is your orders, go out and do it. And then my opponent goes, ooh, how can I stuff Phil's plan? And does their reaction to my orders, and then I look at it and go, cool, my plan worked, their reaction didn't upset it, or, ooh, time to issue new orders and react to their reaction. So a lot of people think the fact that there's no complex turn sequence, no complex command control and so forth means that Flames of War doesn't handle that. But I think it actually handles it better than many of the rules that have these complexities in them, because adding complexity doesn't improve the model.
History gives you a guiding path, but at the same time it's a dangerous line between following history doggedly, where you're literally down to simulation level, which simulation games have their place, but they are not largely the thing you can play in 90 minutes with friends and leave going, I had a great time. They're days of work and detail which appeal to a far smaller minority of people.
It's a historical game rather than a simulation, so I think that one of the first things that stops Flames of War being a simulation is the mechanics. Really, it's sort of they're pretty simple at their basic level. So, I mean, a lot of the games you'd call simulations I've experienced in the past they get a bit fiddly with the tank and artillery firing. There's a whole pile of rolls and tables involved, looking at various statistics. I mean, I think the simulation style rules look more closely at variables, I think. So your range, rather than being long and short, or in the case of artillery, if you just have one range, they'd have a whole pile of ranges. So by keeping it simple, we make it an easy in a game sense, but hopefully we still have enough detail in the game that it still seems like World War II. Yeah.
Detail doesn't improve a simulation. Any simulation that has more detail than the absolute minimum is probably worse. Every time you add detail, you add the possibility of getting it wrong. So if Flames of War had a really detailed penetration model, not only would it need a computer to calculate, or it would just be more and more tables and dice rolling and so forth, it's not necessarily going to be any better. If there's a tiny glitch in that, the fact that the model's detailed is likely to magnify that glitch. Whereas the model we have at the moment, which is fairly simple, it's basically take, in effect, the logarithm of the penetration and add a dice, i.e. multiply it by a constant factor and compare it with the logarithm of the armour. It's pretty simple, but that in the end is what it comes down to. We do all the pre-calculation and working out what the penetration rating should be and the armour rating should be, but it gets rid of all the other parts of the simulation. But it's all still there, but it gets rid of the possibility of undesirable errors.
So if you want to do something in the game, you look at what you're trying to do and then trying to think of a kind of simple mechanic within the framework of how Flames of War works to achieve that result. Yeah.
The other part of that, you're talking about results driven, but it's also driven by the fact that this is supposed to be, now I'm going to, I think, quote myself from what somebody quoted to me, it's a fun little game of toy soldiers. And so the mechanisms are designed to actually make you think about what's happening. The arranging in of artillery is a good idea, a good example of this. We could have used just about any mechanism there, but the first step in trying to decide how we're going to do artillery is, well, the first thing you do in artillery is you get on the horn and say, try and dump a round on this target. No, that's not right. And then send an adjustment and try again, and send an adjustment and try again until you get it on target, and then you call for fire for effect. And so it was like, okay, how can we make a really simple mechanism sort of feel like that? How can we make it so that you get the conceptual idea that it's what you're doing? And so despite the fact it's results driven, the process is also trying to sort of contain a story within it. So you feel like the mechanism may be abstract, but you can say, oh yeah, but I know what it's doing. And that's the other half of the simplicity, is choosing out of the trillions of possible mechanisms, one that people can intuitively attach a story to. Now, having that long detour, I'll come back to the second part of what I was going to go to and then let you on with the second or next question. That is the distance side of things. I've talked about how time is elastic in Flames of War, but distance is elastic in Flames of War as well. The idea is to have almost a fisheye view. When I'm looking at something, that's sort of enlarged, and everything else just fades out into the distance. And the idea is that wherever your focus is at the moment, the scale in there is quite big, and everything else sort of spreads out from there. So if you're conducting an assault, then your scale is, 4 inches, 10 centimetres, must be about 50 metres, maybe 100 metres at the outside. And this area here is only a few hundred metres. Of course, if you're having a tank battle, then this is a kilometre. And we can have a tank battle and it works fine. But if the artillery's sort of firing, well, actually, no, we're talking about several kilometres here, 5, 6, 7, 8 kilometres. But of course, if your infantry get up to my artillery battery, well, then we zoom in on the artillery battery and the scale changes there. So it's sort of almost like a computer game where you see the general picture and you go, no, I want to see what's going on there, and zoom in. Where I started with this was keeping it simple is one of the design principles, fundamental design principles of Flames of War. And it's got the two parts. One is, it's a game of toy soldiers. It's supposed to be simple, it's supposed to be fun. But two is, it actually makes it a better simulation, in my opinion. Simpler systems, if they're good enough, are actually better than complex systems at modelling things.